Good evening. For those of you who came for the book auction, you can leave. We're not going to have an auction, but we do have some books by Bruce Stephenson that he will sign for you if you purchase them. So help yourself, please. The only announcement I have is the same one I made at the annual meeting, and that is we need volunteers. We need people to step up and say, we think this organization, the Venice Area Historical Society, is an important part of this community and that we want to help. Now, you can help by being a hostess or host at the back, passing out cookies, or you can volunteer to be a chair. We have several committees, standing committees that we need chairs for, and we need your help. We need you to step up and say, I can do this. And if you would contact me, please, if you have an idea that you'd like to help out somehow. Or Carol Bailey. In the back, she greeted you when you came in. So that's my commercial for tonight. So thank you for your patience. And as always, Betty will introduce our speaker this evening.
It's good to see such a good crowd, especially in May, when we have so many people already leaving for their original homes. I got to know Bruce quite a number of years ago when I decided to take a short trip to St. Petersburg, where he was going to talk about John Nolen, who he knows almost intimately, even though John's been dead a long time. Bruce brings it back to life. Thank you. Thank you. Bruce is currently director of the Department of Environmental Studies and Sustainable Urbanism, that's a mouthful, at Rollins College, Winter Park, Florida. How many have been to Winter Park? It's a wonderful town. Bruce is the author of Visions of Eden, Environmentalism and Urban Planning in St. Petersburg, Florida. He is also the author of a book about the man who designed the plan for our city, Venice, Florida. And that man is John Nolen. So he's here tonight to speak about John Nolen, who's also a landscape architect as well as a city planner. Bruce has brought his students for many years to Venice because Nolen built what is called, and I'm willing to bet a lot of you don't know where they are, pocket parks. Well, Bruce started coming here years ago to show his students those pocket parks and talk about John Nolen. That's how I first learned about Bruce. Since then, I have asked him to speak to this society and its members a number of times. Recently, he brought some of our members to see, as I said, Venice's pocket parks as planned by John Nolen. Tonight, Bruce is here to speak about John Nolen, an Olmsted disciple. Now, who is Olmsted? Anybody know? Oh, some of you do. As you shall find out from Bruce, Olmsted Sr. defined the profession of landscape architecture. Nolen was determined to advance the legacy of people who did landscape architecture. With that, I want you to give a warm Venice welcome to Bruce.
Thank you, Betty. It's great to be in church. Also, most of you have heard of Frederick Law Olmsted in Central Park, okay? Tonight's lesson is that you have Olmsted DNA coursing through your town of Venice. And the slide you see in front of me, in front of you behind me, is does everybody recognize the bottom photo where that is in Venice? Yeah, it's the Parkway, right? And on top is Bach Sanctuary. The same time John Nolen was designing Venice, the Olmsted brothers were designing Bach Sanctuary. And there's this wonderful connection between the two. Now, usually when we think of Venice and new urbanism. That, as you can see, Venice is very similar to Seaside. In fact, Andrestuani, the designer of Seaside, plagiarized John Nolen. He gladly admits it, where Seaside is considered the most important new town planning project of the last 25 years, and it defines what urban planners are now doing. But what's not so well known is Nolen's record as a landscape architect. And what I should mention, I forgot to mention this, that there's a John Nolen medal. Have you ever seen the John Nolen medal? I have it. Unfortunately, it's at home, and it's on my shoes I forgot to bring as well. The tennis shoes are really not stylish. It's my mind going. But if you look at the medal, on the front is John Nolen, on the back is the plan for Venice. And it's a beautiful medal designed in Italy, and I was lucky enough to win it a couple of years ago back when we were during the pandemic. But some of the previous winners, Andrestuani, his wife, Elizabeth Platter-Zabrik, and a guy named Victor Dover. I don't know if you know Victor, but I think he's the best town planner in the state of Florida. And Victor and I are currently working on a project for Lake Wales. And you see the caption below that? Can everybody read that? Olmsted City in 10, 25, and 50 years. So I've been working with Victor on this, and we have a long history. That's Victor on the far left, that's me on the far right, 25 years ago, working on a project in Winter Springs. Oh, I should say, the most important thing in this photo, I have one of my students holding a picture of John Nolen, just to let you know that it was Nolen inspired. Victor always uses John Nolen's principles, and to show Victor's work, he came to Park Avenue. If you've been to Winter Park, redesigned it. That's Park Avenue on the left before Victor Dover. That's Park Avenue on the right after Victor Dover. Yes. And so he recently did a project in Lake Wales called Lake Wales Connected, same type of thing. But what's happened is because of the growth in Polk County and Lake Wales' special standing, Lake Wales has been designated a legacy project for the state of Florida, which I'll go into. So what I've been doing is looking at this connection for Lake Wales between Nolen on the right and Olmsted Jr. on the left. What's fascinating is in 1903, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. passed. When he passed on, his sons, the Olmsted brothers, started a new firm. If that's for me, I'm not here. They started a firm and they didn't want to kind of upstage their father, so they created something called a park system. At the same time, in 1903, Frederick Olmsted Jr. was the head of the Harvard Landscape Architecture program, the first in the world. And guess who his top student was? Although they were the same age, it was John Nolen. And for his honors thesis, John Nolen had to write the first biography of Olmsted's father. So there's this rich history I want to share with you tonight, and then show you how it's come to life in Venice. This is a great quote from another historian. It says, "Nolen burst upon the scene almost as a gift upon the gods to replace Charles Eliot." Now, the story here, it's fascinating. Charles Eliot, landscape architect. Charles Eliot Sr. was the president of Harvard. His son, Charles Eliot Jr., became really the first professional landscape architect. When your father's the president of Harvard, you can have Olmsted Sr. as your mentor. So Charles Eliot did amazing work, and I won't go into the details, but his plan to protect the water supply for Boston still exists. And Charles Eliot was set to take over the Harvard Landscape Architecture program, and he died. And his father wrote this book, and the book changed John Nolen's life. He decided to become a landscape architect. And so when he shows on the scene, you have this great synergy between Olmsted Jr. and Nolen that will create the city planning profession, and it defines both Bach Sanctuary and Venice. What is different about Nolen than Olmsted Jr., Olmsted Jr.'s father was Olmsted Sr., obviously. John Nolen's father was shot, not that it made in a political dispute, not that it makes any difference, but he was shot by a gun-wielding Republican, and his father was a Democrat. But, you know, that's just politics. Ron DeSantis will give a message on that. So after his father quickly passed, John Nolen was sent to an orphanage. And the orphanage is called Girard College. It's this beautiful place. It was designed by the wealthiest man in America, Stephen Girard. It was this idea of what wealth could do for those less fortunate. So John Nolen grew up in an orphanage. He saw that every day, and it's hardly accident that he was inspired by the Italian Renaissance, because when Nolen would go on to become the first student from Girard College to go to the University of Pennsylvania, and like Donald Trump, John Nolen went to the Wharton School. So there's all these great Democrat political connections here. We're all in this together is the message tonight. And I love this painting because in the middle is Lorenzo il Magnifico, Lorenzo the Magnificent. And the young man on the right is Michelangelo. And if you see that worried look on his face, that's because he thinks they're all making fun of him, which they are, because they go, that guy's a genius and he doesn't realize it. And he's bringing up this work, which is a faun, actually a symbol of pagan love of nature. But I love this idea of the Medici investing in art, because that was the message that John Nolen got when he went to the University of Pennsylvania. Tonight's assignment, I always have my students see the Medici. This is all on film. It's great, but the Medici by the late 19th, early 20th century is personified by Andrew Carnegie, right? At Rollins, we have a Carnegie building. If you go to Tuskegee, there's more Carnegie buildings than anywhere else. So this is the mind that the Medici invented accounting. It's April 15th. We have them to thank, right? They had great wealth, but they invested it. And that was the message. How do we take great wealth and invest it back in society? Because by then, the United States was the richest country in the world. The way you do it is you copy the Germans. Most of the professors at the University of Pennsylvania were from Germany, because Germany had become an industrial country. They didn't have the great wealth resources we did, so they had to be really efficient. They're also, this is great politics, they're the ones who invented Social Security, worker housing, good health insurance. And I love this photo because you wonder why the Germans are so good in soccer. Here's the soccer field, and here's all the perfect housing, right? And after you get good German instruction, you go out here in regimented forms and play soccer. You can see how efficiently the Germans design things, and to this day. So Nolen was educated in two ways, and that's how I try to educate my student: the efficiency of the Germans and the love of beauty and art of the Italians. We all agree. There's the Axis, but that's another story. Okay, moving right on. The other great inspiration in Nolen's life is after he graduates, he goes to the Chicago World's Fair, where it was put on to, we were competing with the French after the Paris World's Fair and the Eiffel Tower. And this is an amazing place. And when the American people saw it, they fell in love with it. And I said, this is one of the things that changed America, was coming to that. Isn't that great? Now, what's the difference between us and the French? That big park in the middle, do you all see that? Guess who designed that? Olmsted. Yes, all right, time to go home. All right, so that was one of Olmsted's last projects, but inspires Nolen to do something great with his life. And he spends 10 years working at the University of Pennsylvania doing education, actually things like this, adult education. But he works with this really interesting guy, I won't go into too much detail, called Edward Howard Griggs. But Griggs thought this idea of the new humanism, because Darwin, at that time, if you were in the Ivy League, was passé. And so how do we replace Darwin? Well, we go back to the classical Greeks and Romans and the Renaissance, get those classical ideals and apply them to modern society. And that's what Nolen spends the rest of his life doing. And he takes a sabbatical. I just had one. I tried to follow him. I got halfway, I went to Italy. But Nolen spent a year in Munich studying Italian Renaissance art and Germantown planning. Ooh, yes. And he came back to the United States determined, after reading Charles Eliot's book, remember that he reads that book, he says, I'm going to become a landscape architect. And what he does, these are photos he took. On the left is a photo he took. He went and experienced Central Park, said, if this is really great, I'm going to become a landscape architect. And he's immersed in Central Park, and he realizes Olmsted's a genius. Now, the other thing that Nolen brings that Olmsted did not have, he was kind of Victorian and staid. He looked like Santa Claus. Very, conservative, not in a bad way, but he wasn't hip, kind of like John Nolen, these paintings are of a guy named Carozio, R-O-T. And so at Nolen, perhaps because he was an orphan, wanted to make sure people that went to parks were also happy. They weren't there to get divine inspiration by looking at beauty, but they're also to be happy and enjoy themselves. So if you look like the characters in that painting going through Venice, you know Nolen succeeded. The other thing that Nolen does, and where he really comes to life, is Olmsted Jr. takes his students to visit the Olmsted Park system in New York, which includes, on the left, I don't know if you can see this. Does anybody know where that is? Brooklyn, New York. Wow, and that cool Prospect Park. And on the right, before you became a landscape architect, you had to study landscape painting and the works of Turner. And when you look at that vision of like infinity, that's what Olmsted was trying to do. He's trying to get you into a park, so you're looking out like Henry Hudson looked at it, infinity, and you're forced to contemplate something besides yourself in a greater world. Does that make sense to everyone? And also, they studied Da Vinci. I love this term, follow nature, then use your imagination. But the Mona Lisa isn't really important because of its smile. If you look at the background of the photo, of the painting, you see nature in motion. And wherever you sit, you can see the rivers moving. And this was a radical message that nature was in motion. And if we could figure out how nature moved and what made it move in the motion, we could come closer to God. Now, if you said that, you got put on the rack. But this was, the concept that the Renaissance and the Italians were unearthing. And the big thing is the difference between what we call a medieval mindset and the Renaissance mindset. Now, when you go to Notre Dame, you go up there, you realize, look up, you go, I'm going to hell, right? That's basically the message here. You're screwed unless you get in that church and repent. Now, what the Renaissance does is different. I'm going to go on this side. The goal of the Renaissance was for people to look not up, but out. And these are gardens designed by the Medici, and they want to show the world how the world's changing. So this is the plan. This is this formal, this is when you step out of your villa. Everybody with me on that? Then you walk out to there, that little circle, as you look out and you see all the way across to the Duomo. And you see this vision to the horizon, and that became the new idea of beauty, not looking up, but looking out and contemplating nature. You're not contemplating God anymore, but you're contemplating nature. Okay, so this is, why is the Renaissance so important? Well, it's shifting our mind, and it also gets us back to the design qualities of the classic periods of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And it's kind of neat how this works. There's Nolen's first project, Daphne Park. Everybody with me on that? You can see the similarity. In the middle are the same trees I showed at the beginning. Isn't that beautiful? And so again, it's this Olmsted idea, but Nolen's taking in a new realm. And his favorite place, and you all should do this, is to go to Prospect Park in the fall. And if you've never been, Prospect Park is like right off Flatbush, right? Where everybody sounds like Sylvester Stallone, right? And then you go from Flatbush, you go through this dark tunnel, and you come out of the tunnel, and you emerge into what's called the Long Meadow that I showed. And, you know, Brooklyn is now a place to live and be because of Prospect Park. You can see how busy it is. But Nolen also would visit and study all the parks in Boston. And like I said, he wrote this biography of Olmsted. And this is Franklin Park. There's an emerald necklace in Boston, but this is a park. And when he was doing his research, they actually had sheep. Those are sheep there instead of lawnmowers. And it actually looked like a painting. He even goes and said, these parks remind me of the painting of Corot and the other great landscape European painters. And what we need to do is realize Olmsted's vision. And Olmsted, of course, is known for Central Park on the left. You know, the highest real estate, this is how I reach my business students. I said the highest real estate values in the United States are in Central Park, so you better like the parks, Bo. But when Olmsted Sr. dies, as I mentioned, his sons do this thing called a park system, and the first one is in Portland, Oregon. And one of the reasons Portland, Oregon is so green, they have an Olmsted park system. It dates to 1903. And I went to Portland in 1990. I couldn't wait to, meet with the park director, and she was from Harvard, and I was like, I'm gonna get the keys to the kingdom. And she gave me the Olmsted Brothers 1903 Parks Plan. So that's how important it is. And I always have my students analyze it. That's Olmsted Park in Portland today on the National Historic Register, but then Nolen and Olmsted Jr. write this article on how to design park systems that had never been in the United States. So Nolen suddenly becomes of national recognition equal to Olmsted Jr., okay? And this is about 1906. And when, even before Nolen graduates, his first commission is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's gotten to him by the president of Harvard. And he goes down, takes a side tour, and goes to, do y'all know where this is? Right, designed by Olmsted, and he kind of goes off the beaten path, because this place is amazing. I'm bending my knee to the genius of Olmsted. And there's the place he finds, he just, falls in love with. And he goes, how can I build on this? And then he encounters the other reality of Charlotte. And on the left, it was, segregated, and he had never been south of the Mason-Dixon line. And he encountered African-American, this stuff, and then the housing. And so when he does his first city plan, he says, whatever we do, if we don't improve the quality of their lives, we lose. And what was eminently logical about Nolen, but it's considered radical today. He looked at the city as an organism, very biological, very Darwinian. He said, okay, how do we keep an organism alive? We'll make sure all the interconnected parts are healthy and functioning. Well, that's hard to do when the black section of town doesn't have paved roads, doesn't have parks. Everybody with me on that? So when he did his plans, you couldn't tell where the black and white sections were, which is really common sense, right? That's why they got thrown out. So, not to mention that, but my next book, bring me back in 3 years, is called The Klansman and the City Plan, Thomas Dixon, John Nolen, and the Birth of a New Nation. When Nolen's second night in Charlotte, he's taken to see the opening of The Klansman. The Klansman was a novel by Thomas Dixon, turned into a play, then the play was turned into The Birth of a Nation, where the Ku Klux Klan rides to the rescue, right? And then Nolen, much to his surprise, the next night he's the guest of honor, but he's seating next to Thomas Dixon. And at the end of the play, The Klansman, it was kind of, the Birth of a Nation is famous because it's like the first blockbuster, but they actually had cannons firing and, they actually lit the crosses on fire. And Nolan's like at the end of it, and the people are clapping. He's like, oh my God, I'm screwed. And he writes back to his wife, these people are totally lost their mind. What am I going? So the new book is looking at each, it's a chapter on Thomas Dixon and a chapter of Nolen as they go through their lives with their different visions of America. And of course, the one on the right is very important because the key to the story is Nolen's plan for Harlem Village in Venice. But that's not tonight's story. That's just a cheap advertisement I threw in. What happens, Nolen, obviously a bright guy, he's hired by the American Society of Landscape Architecture because landscape architects don't know what to do. So they start getting the great landscape architects of England, and one is Henry Repton, and Nolen edits and reintroduces this. And what Repton does is he'll design something to do before and after. And that's why Victor Dover is so good. I was just giving an example of what he's done in Lake Wales, before and after. And if you guys ever want to push to hire somebody to make Venice even better, call Victor. The other thing Nolen does that mimics Olmsted, and you can begin to see where Venice is coming from. Olmsted designed a suburb outside of Chicago. It was considered the first suburb in the United States, Riverside, Illinois. And then Nolen does a suburb in Charlotte. His park plans kind of fail. This usually happens, he does these really idealistic plans that the public doesn't buy into, but the private investors like his idea. And so he takes the plan for Riverside, designs this place called Myers Park, and look at that. Right here, it might be hard to see, there's a little creek going through here. You know how he figured out how wide to make the park? If the creek floods, that's how wide it is, so it protects the property. The other radical thing he did was put in these dots are called trees and sidewalks. So look what it looks like today. Isn't that amazing? And so you can begin to see, right? We could do a whole tour of Nolen towns and see the beauty. His next plan is in Roanoke, Virginia, where he does the same system of interconnected park systems. And I was just going to show you. Always this interconnection, always the interconnection. Oftentimes on floodplains. This is Mill Mountain, and this is the Roanoke River. And here's what they look like today. Isn't that amazing? And Mill Mountain on the left is also the beginning or the end of the Blue Ridge Parkway. So there's all this rich history. That's what he had to deal with the downtown Roanoke, say, help us. And he would always take something from the local design. So he took the University of Virginia. If you've ever been there, it's an amazing place. He put the plan for the University of Virginia, dropped it on downtown Roanoke. So we're going to reorganize on this same concept. But the real shift in Nolen's life was the second most read novel in the 19th century. Uncle Tom's Cabin was #1. Looking Backward was 2, The Klansman was 3, but that's the next book. Looking Backward is about a guy falling asleep in Boston. It's in the late 1890s. You can see on one side it's dark. He wakes up in the future. It's a democratic socialist system maybe like Sweden, but the city is run efficiently. And it became a bestseller. It led to a political movement. And this guy in England named Ebenezer Howard designed a garden city where we could put 25,000 people in a way to protect the environment, create community, and provide affordable housing. And the place that was built was called Letchworth, another one's Hampstead, and Nolen will go there in 1909 and study it with about 100 other really interesting reformers. That's in the book, and there's their photo. But the basic idea is you need to put people closer together to use land efficiently, but make sure the spaces they have are beautiful. So you design people, you're going to put them closer together, right? Make sure they have access to land like that. And the work we're doing in Orlando, and I'll show you at the end, we need to get a third of the population living like that. So we will be around in 50 years. Y'all like that? And you can see England, Venice is very similar to that. But what really, the other thing that happens is this, and I just, back to the political scene, whatever political party realizes that young people need housing is going to do really well. Because the number one issue I see with students is they can't afford housing. Affordable housing is the issue. But it was also the issue 106 years ago. During World War I, the United States industry was going well, but the capitalists who were producing the weapons and making money realized they took it from the Germans. We're never going to have a good product if we don't have good workers. And if the workers are living in tenements, they're not going to be good. So they start building housing. They hire John Nolen to design worker housing. And I love the one on the right. It looks very much like an English town. He always has kids out front because he was an orphan, right? So these are what's going through his mind. And then World War I breaks out. The other thing that's cool, John Nolen, a week before World War I, he goes with Hamilton Holt. Hamilton Holt's the president of Rollins, who brings Rollins to national attention. They go to Woodrow Wilson, try to convince him not to go to war. 1932, and I'll talk about it, Venice is the model for the design of Rollins campus. They said, just think if we would have been successful. But what happens, World War I starts in the Germans, would you rather drive a Mercedes or a Ford? Right? And what was happened, they started doing all these studies, centennial of World War I. For every 3 shots the Germans take, they get 1 hit. For the Allies, they take 5 shots. Why? Because the German workers were living much better than the English and American workers. And so there's Nolen, I have that arrow pointing at him. He meets with the British and they decide to do the same type of worker housing that the Germans are building, so they'll create better weapons. Does that make sense to everyone? Especially you have to realize in 1917, the Russians give up, become freaking communists. And the only thing between us and defeat is the French army. So we need a lot of help in a hurry. And they start building these communities. And Nolen and Olmsted Jr. build more than anybody else. And that's a place called Union Park Village. People love it today. There's the plan. They show always there's a creek going through the middle. It's a parkway. There's what it looks like today. But look at the housing, right? And it's all, no single family housing, but it looks really great, right? And so this is this legacy that Nolen leaves. And he is asked by the government to write a book called New Ideals in City Planning, and that's his work on the left. He says the peace dividend is we're going to provide housing like this for every American citizen with a peace dividend. Congress got that, realized, man, our private realtors can't keep up with that. We're not going to do it. But that's when, if you want to look at what should we be doing with our investments for best return on investment, the Germans are much smarter than we are. They know what they're getting, right? If we invest in good housing, we get a better society. So Nolen was upset. He went into depression for him, became a nudist. That's the X-rated part of the book. But 1919, the richest woman in the United States, Marie Emery, hires him to design Marymount as a model for worker housing. So he finally gets his dream realized. It's designed just like Letchworth, and it's Olmsted on steroids. Yes, I was going to say something else, exactly. And so on the left is Letchworth, England. On the right is Marymount. It's called the National Exemplar. They've got a great bar, that's the name of it. And on Nolen's plan, it's called the National Exemplar. This was going to be the model for the future of America. And you can see all the green stuff on here.
Where is it?
It's right outside Cincinnati. Right outside Cincinnati. And it was at on the streetcar line coming from Cincinnati. See all the green stuff on there? I'll give you a quick reason why that's green. And the town center isn't exactly in the center of the property. It says town, you know why it's there? It's the highest point. So just like those Italian beautiful towns are always at the highest point, you can see everything out. So I'm going to show you how he took Olmsted's park principles, all right, and applied them to the town to make it beautiful and close to nature. Now, there's this big hunk of green down here. Well, there is a ravine. You don't want to put anybody living in a ravine, right? But so I went and visited down there. It's like, wow, I'm in the middle of this town. I could be, the scene from Last of the Mohicans. They were actually filming it there. And what was cool is, this is the photo right here. What you see, you come up from the ravine, there's an athletic field there. Everybody with me? And so the natural area flows into the recreational area. And this is the most beautiful spot, I think, in the United States of town planning. It was also the last time I was in church, so I'd like to share that with you. The only thing on the property was a cemetery. So they took this Norman designed church. Everybody with me? And the corner of that lines up with the corner of the building across the way. And in between is a little green. This is a type of thing you learn from Olmsted. How do we take these different elements of parks and create really cool living places? And that's the building across the way, and it's a landscape architect's office down there. And look at the view. Okay? I could quit on this, right? It doesn't get any better than that, right? That, to me, is the epitome of the synergy of landscape architecture and town planning with a religious verve to it. And that's actually me in church. I got to speak there. And I'll share you this. I'll share some of the slides from that. But Marymount is just an amazing place, and it inspired Venice. And actually, that's the photo I showed. That's me on the right. I was trying to live the same scale of life as you have at Marymount, and that's called Baldwin Park. It used to be a Navy base. Everybody should visit there. Great living conditions. The only problem is I had 4 bathrooms. I needed 2, but that's another story. But to create and protect these type of parks, you got to put people close together. Does that make sense? And this is a view from the church to the school, right? So again, this amazing design, and there you see up in the corner the church and the school. And this is a neighborhood, right? The Department of Transportation, has to put their ugly signs in there. But look how beautiful that is. And you know how wide he designed? The entrance was for like 1 car, and the other one was for 2 people holding hands to walk through. Of course, if you're a kid of a water balloon, you know where you ended up. But he plagiarized from the Germans. And look at there, he took it right out of Germany. There's all those kids again, right? He always has. This is literally, it's like a work of art, and they designed it so the yards kept getting bigger and it takes your eye to the back. Is beautiful, right? Okay. Now we're going to go from the school on a thing called a parkway to the center of town, and this is very similar to Venice. There's the town center. It's on the National Historic Register, again, like Venice. One of my students took that, isn't that beautiful? Now we're going to, there's a parkway, radical thing, park on side, park in the middle, ways on either side. That is not a parkway. It's called John Young Parkway in Orlando. They should be sued for false advertising. Because here's what happens on John Young Parkway, right? SUV gets its, what God wants it to get. All right. But this is also in downtown Venice, downtown Marymount. They have a village green, and it's really green. It's all nature, and this is a memorial to Miss Emery. Here we go again out of that Italian Renaissance. We're going from the town center, and you'll see the same design in Venice. Town Hall, most beautiful spot in nature, and there's a parkway connecting the two. So the idea, we live in a republic, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, founded on the laws of nature, and nature's God, the idea is to be close to nature, but at the same time cognizant of our duties as citizens. And it was this Olmsted belief that if you were close to nature, you would be a better citizen. And Thomas Jefferson believed that. He thought the best citizens were farmers who were close to nature. Olmsted actually saw people living in these type of suburbs to be the new Yeoman farmer who would take care of the nature in their own lives. So Nolen adopts this, and this is just walking down the parkway, I was seeing how people use their town. And this is at the edge of town, and again, it's very similar to Venice, except the beach, right? This overlooks River Valley. There's the concourse. There's what it looks like. How do you like that for a park, right? And then you look out one of those little windows there. I got a little carried away and put my Thomas Cole painting there, but isn't that nice? And one of my students took that. And so that's what you get for free. Now, I don't think it's probably as good as a Venice sunset, but it's on the same design quotient. And then it's cool. There's all these little different types of parks. And I won't even go into the 7 different types of Olmsted parks. My students have to do that to graduate. But you go back there, there's a statue of the family. Isn't that cool? Family values, where mom, dad, the parents, how can we have generations living together? And that was the other thing Nolen wanted to do. This is a little technical, but you also figured out by your relationship to the public realm and parks, your real estate would have a certain value. So he said, well, I wrote this book, New Ideals. It didn't exactly happen like I hoped, but I'm going to take this idea and go to Florida because there's a bunch of money being dropped called the greatest land boom in the history of the United States. I put New Ideals in a consumer culture, and Nolen develops Florida's first city plan. And I love this photo on the left. That's Uncle Sam dancing with Miss Florida. The caption should read, get a what? What's the legal document called before you get married? Yeah, get a prenup. I'm sorry, it slipped my mind for a second. But Nolen had this wonderful idea, if you look on the top, to create an American Riviera centered on St. Petersburg, right? Visually, they're very similar. And when he was giving his presentation in St. Petersburg, this is the slide he used on the left of Nice, France. And again, this is a bit technical, but there's that Olmsted Park system. And at the time, there were like 10,000 people living in St. Petersburg. And the city's size is about that big. What he did was say, we're going to set a boundary for the future St. Petersburg. And the boundary is going to be all places you don't want to live, okay? Because if you live there, you will die. Okay, that's the work I used to do. See the red areas? That's hell. That's when a hurricane comes, you die, right? That's the evacuation areas. Everybody with me on that? And there's what happens when a Category 4 hurricane hits Tampa Bay. Those people will be dead if they don't leave. And what's cool is the one area, right? That's where Nolen wanted the future of St. Petersburg to be. And there it is. And this is a close-up right here. All these barrier islands, he said, keep them natural. It wasn't too hard because back then no one lived on them because you would die. There were regular hurricanes. There was one bridge that got knocked out. So he said, let's put a tram to the mainland, and the yellow is tourist, and we're going to put this tram here, run it up through here. Purple is what we call mixed-use development, but where people can live on a streetcar line, but tourists can come out to that natural area, okay? Today it's called Nice, France, right? That could have been St. Petersburg. And it's not that radical of an idea. When Nolen was selling his plan to St. Petersburg, he used Nice, France, and their public waterfront as a model. Below that is the first public waterfront in the state of Florida. In St. Petersburg, maybe you've all been there. It's amazing space. It's why St. Petersburg is a much better place to hang out when my students tell me I'm too old for that than Orlando. And this is Nolen's plan. The purple areas are all places you don't need a car, and they have shopping. The yellow would be for tourists. You would not need a car. All the green are parks. It's all interconnected, so everybody's within a quarter to half mile of a park or a stop on a transit line. Does that make sense? And again, the radical thing, you can't tell where the black neighborhood is here. And so when it came time to invest in this, the Ku Klux Klan showed up, and the plan only got 13% of the vote. So sadly, Nolen gave up on the public. He said, I have these private investors in a place called Venice and have 90,000 acres of land, and I could do what I wanted in St. Petersburg without the public being involved. And have you ever seen this plan for Venice, the regional plan? Amazing. And then this is the other thing. I think you guys should all get t-shirts that say this. The 7 points that make Venice different. Of course, one is a city plan. John Nolen. They had great architects, Prentice French, landscape architect. I mean, the people that did Venice were all Ivy League quality, amazing opportunity, right? Unfortunately, the timing was a little off, but the Myakka River we still see today. And then, as I mentioned, Nolen is adamant that we do something for folks of color in housing, because it has to happen or you're never going to have a Riviera. I think we're all familiar with this plan, but you can see how similar it is to Marymount. Also, it's very similar. Here's the plan for Rollins College. Hamilton Holt, our president, came in with that great cornucopia of wealth, and he decided to design a new campus, and he came to study Venice in its plan. And on the right is Rollins, and we had done some work a while back comparing Rollins and Venice. There's this, I hope you can see that. That's the sketch of the architecture for Venice. It looks a lot like Rollins College, same motif. And there's Venice, historic. So we've got this great Olmstedian work of art, which Nolen translates with that Italian beauty, quasi-German efficiency. And in the early days, Venice is kind of this nice mix of wealth and also more affordable housing. There's, of course, what it looks like today. I think we're all familiar. I'm always afraid it's going to be knocked down before I come up here. And different scale of housing, the worker housing, I think is really important. But again, Nolen's able to preserve the natural environment by putting people closer together, and you have this amazing resource. And of course, walking down the parkway, you can see the same thing, right, from City Hall. The other thing, if you ever look close at this plan, it says view, V-I-E-W here, because that's the first place you could view the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's why they put City Hall, so you can view the Gulf. And then you have this walk, and look what you get for free, right? You're all familiar with that. Remember that Olmsted, that painting the Nolen studied, right, of the infinity of church? Anyway, it's a pretty amazing point. Sadly, like the timing, Venice got started 5 years too late. Nolen, Florida collapsed, Nolen's business collapsed, and he ended up his last 6 years teaching at Harvard. This is how I keep my students paying attention. He was also a nudist, and there's this photo of the nudist camp on the bottom there. He said, if you have less clothes, you're a better person. But we'll skip away from that. But he was also in the nature, Aldo Leopold, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, first ecologist in the United States. He taught at the University of Wisconsin and opened up the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. Nolen started working closely with him when there was a coup at Harvard. This wonderful man named Walter Gropius, a modernist architect, took over from the landscape architects. They threw them out. The modernist architects came in, and it's called urban renewal. But look at the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. It's the longest going ecological restoration project in the world. On the right is Aldo Leopold with his students. Do you know what he's doing? They had this beat up old farmland and pasture, so he took his students out and set it on fire. and you know, the dean gets the call, that crazy guy is setting it on fire. What the hell's going on? Well, it regenerates, I'm sorry, to look like that, okay? And so, long story, I think when we look at John Nolen and Olmsted, is I found this on his gravestone. It's in Cambridge. And he lies very close to Charles Eliot Jr., ironically, right? And this was actually a model for Central Park. Before they had Central Park, people a little different, but they would go to cemeteries to have a park experience. But the art of town planning, and I think Venice is a work of art, and I think the public spaces demand that the architecture and everything else have this artistic value. And the other thing I work with my students, John Nolen wasn't just a landscape architect. He just wasn't a city planner. He was a true Renaissance man. And he kind of the whole thing from the Renaissance and the Medici inspired his life. And Nolen still gets a lot of action. Nolen to now is in Madison, Wisconsin. I grew my hair out over sabbatical and went to the Nolen in San Diego, and I had a $200 bar bill, but I had the time of my life. My wife won't let me show the other pictures. It was funny. When this was open, I got interviewed by the San Diego Tribune, and they said, this place is kind of wild. There's a drum circle up there. What would John Nolen think about that? The question you want to ask is, would he have his clothes on? This is a John Nolen park in San Diego called Torrey Pines. Isn't that amazing? So there's some real legacy here. I took these pictures and, right, what better place to sit and contemplate your existence. This is work that I'm doing inspired by Aldo Leopold, John Nolen, and the Olmsteds. It's called the Genius Preserve. This is Rollins College. This is 50 acres of land set between 3 lakes in Winter Park. Guess how much that's worth?
Wow.
Oh, yeah. And so the 50 acres, it's a long story, but it's set aside as a conservation easement. And 20 years ago, I was asked to help them make it more natural. I said, are you sure you want to listen to what I'm going to tell you? And so that's what it looks like today, right? We took the Arboretum plan for the University of Wisconsin, took the same principles, and there's our guidebook, 60 pages. On the left, guess which one is Bach Sanctuary, and guess which one's the Genius Preserve? Bach is on the left. You can probably see it a little more, right? But isn't that cool how similar they were? And that's why I'm working with Bach on this. There's the home on the Genius Preserve. There's Pinewood at Bach Sanctuary. One of the things we had to do is when we started the project off 21 years ago was we had to figure out what was there, and we found out about 20% of the land was degraded. It was been overgrown of exotics. And so we developed a plan. Again, that's the plan for Bach on the left. We did the same type of plan for this restoration area. And it literally looked like the moonscape. And they said, what should we do? We told them to cut down what turned out to be over 150 trees. And it's like, I thought you guys were tree huggers. You're cutting down trees. And, the board members were like upset. I said, trust us. And the guy that's sweaty back is me. I'm sweating. He goes, oh my God, I could be out of a job. But we had the students work on it. And I checked out our planting scheme because we use the same plants that you see at Bach. On the left is Bach. On the right is our project. I tell my students these are mildly hallucinogenic, that they're beauty berries. And there's again our team, and that's what it looks like today. Wow. And one of the awards we won was from 1,000 Friends of Florida, which to me is the group to go to. And the award was the Better Community Award we got, and that was almost 15 years ago. But recently, remember Victor Dover spoke 1,000 Friends of Florida about the future of Lake Wales. And I want to end on this. This is a study we did back in 2005. On the top is if Orlando continues to sprawl out. The dark pink is new growth. Is everybody with me on that? The bottom one, this looks like my students' eyes on a Friday morning. This is if we put in a rail system, and we said, well, you can't do that. Well, it's the same thing Portland, Oregon's already done. That's why I studied Portland. But see this circle here? This is the Lake Wales Ridge. That's why Lake Wales is so important, especially with climate change, because as people evacuate, they're going to be going to higher land. Does that make sense to everyone? And I was on the mayor of Orlando's sustainability task force after this, and he marched into our first meeting. Mayors always march. And he said, we want Orlando to become the Portland of the Southeast. And to do that, we're going to have to make the car an option. That's our plan. By 2040, one every 2 trips you have to take will not be by a car. So I decided to sell my car, move to Portland, and live there for 2 years. I wrote this book about here's what we have. And the last chapter was Lessons for Orlando. And I said, if we want to know the future of Orlando, and this is before Victor got the project, I took a drive through the outskirts of Orlando and realized there's one place, and that is Lake Wales, where we have the opportunity to plan like John Nolen did. And when John Nolen flew over St. Petersburg and Venice by flight, he goes, what a place for a city. And now we have that same opportunity in Lake Wales. But just to let you know, the 7 points of Venice are informing what we're doing in Lake Wales. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
That area that you showed in St. Pete, was that by Straw Park?
Yes.
Yeah, by the Vinoy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Did John Nolen have a family?
Yes, he had 4 kids. 3 of them were great. He had that one. But they were all Ivy League graduates except for that one. And he had to travel a lot, but his letters between he and his wife are at the Women's History Library at Harvard. And it's really interesting to go through those letters to learn about his family life. Because obviously, as an orphan, he had a different way of life. Yeah, beautiful. Father.
What are the 7 points of Venice planning? I couldn't read it.
Okay. 1, finance owned by the realty company. There's money. It's private money. 2, a complete city plan. 25,000 acres of farmland. And one of the things I showed you about Portland, Portland's got some issues, but it's a foodie city. The reason they put an urban growth boundary around it 50 years ago, and now all the farmers grow food for the people in Portland. Radical idea, but you need to have farmland. Mainland Gulf Front, which is also preserved. Making a port. Now, I don't think that quite happened. Fuller's Army, so they have a labor crew to implement the plan. And finally, all national experts in city planning. Yes, ma'am.
Where was Harlem planned for in Venice.
Not too far from here.
Not far from here.
Yeah, and it was segregated, that's just the reality of the time, and it was surrounded by farmland, but it was to protect the black folks, really.
So when they were working to build parts of Venice,
Yeah, I forgot to mention, that did
were they here, right? in this
yeah, they
area?
did not follow through on that plan. The Harlem Village plan was not implemented. Sadly to say, Nolen did 3 of them. Every new town, he'd do an African-American section, was hoping, right, that would happen. Yes, sir, ma'am.
I'm from Cincinnati and I live right near Vermont. That's why.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, if you want to go to Ohio, the weather in Ohio is nice for like 2 weeks, it's in October. Go there in the fall. All done? Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you offering any odds on the governor versus city projects?
Well, you know, the thing, we had our New Urbanist Conference in downtown Orlando. Another place I think everybody should visit, it's called Creative Village. It was the derelict spot where they used to have the Orlando basketball arena. It is now a campus for 10,000 students from the University of Central Florida. University of Central Florida is one of the largest colleges in the United States and one of the ugliest. If you've ever seen where it's located, it's like suburban hell. And they've got this amazing downtown campus that's going to be the center point of it, but it's also going to house another 10,000 people, and a third of the housing is affordable. And that's the lesson I learned in Portland, the neighborhood I lived in. 1 out of every 3 housing units has to be affordable. I think that's the future. It's not like it's a radical idea, that's just the reality of where we are in the world.
Not here, not here.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with Charles Reith and his work here in Sarasota with Microforce?
No.
His concept is he takes small patches of land and plants a variety of trees close together, which forces them to grow 10 times faster. In other words, you can grow a forest in 10 years instead of 100 years, which also helps with global warming because the patches of land, the trees, will help cool and so on.
Yep.
Some of your pictures almost look like Microforce.
And I should mention our experimental place in Winter Park, the reason we're doing it, you all know where the largest desalinization plant in the Western Hemisphere is?
No.
St. Petersburg. And we're running out of water in Orlando because we have St. Augustine grass where we think we're in England, you know, those pictures I showed you? And 40% of our water goes for that. So our project is we do all natives, have to water them, no fertilizer, pesticide, insecticide, suicide, you know, none of that. And if you can get 40% of your lawn with native plants, we will not run out of water. But that plan I showed you for the future of Orlando is basically a plan to protect the water supply for the future. Because the biggest threat to climate change isn't sea level rise, it's Miami running out of water because of the aquifer, in addition to saltwater. I'll take one more question.
Gropius was the initial motivator of what became the Sarasota School of Architecture.
Yeah, that's the good side of modernism.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.